Tonight,
I think my rhetoric is it brings people together.
presidential pushback. President Trump heads to the crime scenes in Ohio and Texas after shooting massacres left more than 30 dead.
We are aggressively pursuing it.
The spat of killings comes as the FBI is increasingly setting its sights on domestic terrorism. Plus,
it was like there was no other story in the country going on.
The co-host of a new show dings news networks for focusing on the Mueller investigation. And after another Republican resigns from the House,
there is a sense of urgency.
We take you to Texas as the once red state turns purple. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
President Trump consoles the cities at the center of the latest mass shootings in America. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The president was in Dayton and El Paso today. He says he's working with Congress to try and prevent these senseless shootings.
Amber Strong reports on the president's push for change from the White House.
President Trump visited both El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio Wednesday, hoping to bring comfort to the families affected by these tragedies. But before taking off, he doubled down on that recent push for gun reform.
I think background checks are important. I don't want to put guns into the hands of mentally unstable people or people with rage or hate, sick people.
The president then boarded a flight to Dayton, Ohio, where he met with politicians from both sides of the aisle and visited with victims and medical personnel. Amen. His visits didn't come without pushback. El Paso native and presidential hopeful Beto O'Rourke has been on the ground, meeting with the community and criticizing the president.
People in El Paso, by and large, do not want to see him here, understand that he is part of the problem, part of how we got to this point.
President Trump blowing off the response as nothing more than politics.
So my critics are political people. They're trying to make points. In many cases, they're running for president and they're very low in the polls.
Now, when it comes to gun reform, the president is calling on congressional leaders to come together with some sort of agreement so lawmakers can cut their recess short and take action. Amber Strong, CBN News at the White House.
Thanks, Amber. The El Paso shooting is now being investigated as domestic terror. And the FBI just announced Tuesday that last month's shooting at a California festival is also being investigated as domestic terrorism.
CBN's national security correspondent Eric Phillips is here now with us on how federal authorities are addressing this disturbing trend. Eric?
Jenna and John, the FBI is now leading the El Paso and the Dayton investigations. Authorities want to make it clear that they're on top of the case where domestic terrorism is concerned, and not just since last weekend. Saturday morning, in broad daylight, a gunman entered a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and opened fire. According to his own posted manifesto, he was hunting Hispanics because of their, quote, invasion. Less than 24 hours later in downtown Dayton, Ohio, 9 people died in just 30 short seconds of high-powered gunfire before police killed the gunman. Authorities say he had a history of obsession with violent ideologies.
We take domestic terrorism or hate crime, regardless of ideology, extremely seriously.
FBI Director Chris Wray maintaining that the Bureau is aware of this growing trend, but what does domestic terrorism really mean?
We use the term domestic terrorism to refer to a broader array of threats ranging from anarchist extremism to different kinds of racially motivated violent extremism to different kinds of environmental extremism, etc.
According to intelligence report data from the hearing, white supremacists were responsible for more homicides in the U.S. than any other domestic extremist movement between 2000 and 2016.
There is a domestic terrorism underway in the name of race that is as threatening in some respects as the foreign terrorism.
We are aggressively pursuing it.
The U.S. Secret Service is providing resources and studies on mass attacks in public spaces. Their findings in 2018, most perpetrators were male with mental health challenges carrying some sort of grievance. 93% exhibited warning signs. So now the Secret Service is training authorities and communities to recognize them.
Before it gets to the sort of obvious concern and behavior of planning, purchasing a weapon, we want to identify individuals early to deter them off that path.
And a bit of news that could be considered encouraging. Director Wray says so far this year there have been more domestic terrorism arrests than all of last year. And since the Secret Service has been pushing the threat assessment plans, agents have been seeing the number of those killed in mass shootings decrease by nearly 60 people between 2017 and 2018.
Thank you, Eric. Well, joining us now is Julia Manchester with The Hill. Julia, between what we just heard with domestic terror and Eric's reporting and also lawmakers tossing around ideas on gun violence, what's your sense, what's your read based on your reporting?
You know, I think for now we're still seeing a lot of partisanship in this area, and it's kind of what happens after every mass shooting in the United States. There's a lot of blowback from Democrats saying this problem is about guns, while Republicans and the NRA go on the offensive saying there's more to this, like mental health, or we've heard video games as another excuse. So this is definitely going to become politicized in the coming days, but you're seeing some movement among Republicans on the issues of red flag warnings or maybe some strict gun control. Senator Susan Collins, who is facing a tough re-election bid in 2020, has actually come out in favor of closing a gun show loophole for background checks. So that'll be a major turning point if Republicans ever get on board. The problem with that is they're very much beholden to the National Rifle Association. You know, a couple of months ago, I believe there's a clip of an NRA spokesman essentially saying on TV, I believe it was a spokesman saying, if Cory Gardner, who also faces a tough re-election bid, very vulnerable seat, yes, if he supports the red flag law, we'll get a primary challenger for him. So it's very political, unfortunately, right now.
And a lot of 2020 Democrats, they're pointing to President Trump. We saw Beto O'Rourke there. Julia, what is the political calculus here, and could we see this backfire on Democrats?
Well, I think what you're hearing Democrats saying right now is nothing new. I think this is a reaction you would expect from them. I think for Beto O'Rourke in particular, and even for Tim Ryan from Ohio, these took place in their home states. For Beto O'Rourke, his hometown. So obviously their responses are very emotional and they're understandably very angry. However, going into a general election, I think they're probably on more of a right path in terms of where voters are, because I think there have been studies shown saying that Republicans aren't necessarily getting the right calculus as to where the majority of voters are on gun control. I mean, I think there are, a lot of voters are in favor of some sort of background checks or a little more restrictions than there currently are.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has gotten into some trouble in the past for her remarks about President Trump and white nationalism. A lot of the narrative now, Julia, does seem to be heading in that direction. Your thoughts?
Yes, you're actually seeing it quite a bit in that direction. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that sometimes when President Trump is tied to these white nationalist groups, whether it's them trying to tie themselves to him or other politicians, he doesn't necessarily come out and condemn it in a very forceful way. It's kind of when he's kind of forced to do it is when he does it. He doesn't do this voluntarily necessarily. So that's playing into it, and it's the fact that some of the people who he associates with are somewhat controversial. It's kind of easy bait for Democrats to kind of say, look at that. Clearly some sign of white nationalism.
Right. Well, Julia Manchester, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Julia. Well, it has been a week. For much of the day, the market was down, but late afternoon it rallied and closed things mixed today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended the day down 21 points, and the S&P 500 closed up about 2 points. Still, many investors fear what will happen in President Trump's trade war with China. And even with today's slip, the president doesn't seem fazed with how the markets are performing.
Ultimately, it's going to go much higher than it ever would have gone, because China was like an anchor on us. China was killing us with unfair trade deals. The people that allowed that to happen are a disgrace. China, what they were doing to us for years and years, taking hundreds of billions of dollars out, stealing intellectual property, targeting our farmers, all of that's ending, and they understand that.
And even though this may help farmers in the long run, they are certainly feeling the pinch right now. China has announced it will cancel all purchases of U.S. agricultural goods in retaliation for the president's tariffs.
Coming up, she says she was too progressive for a leading cable news channel. Hear her explanation in her own words when we sit down with The Hill's Crystal Ball.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
As the nations rage, you can stand with Israel.
History is being written, and I want to be a part of it.
Call 1-800-700-7000 and get to life.
This is our nature as a country.
Discover the untold story of how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
We consider it our duty to reach out and help others around the world.
For a gift of $10 or more, you can own the acclaimed CBN documentary To Life.
To treat a human, no matter what he is, which religious he have, which color he is, this is what I'm doing.
Support Israel in their time of need. Get to Life, now available on DVD. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
And I wish that other people throughout the world could see this side of Israel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Crystal Ball was an anchor at one of the biggest news organizations in America, but now she's criticizing the channel where she once worked.
And Ball sat down with CBN's David Brody to discuss why she's speaking out against MSNBC and other cable news networks.
I think there can be this sense on the left and out in the public in general that MSNBC is like on Team Democrat and is an ally to Democrats and is pushing things that are going to be positive for Democrats. But ultimately, you know, what MSNBC really is, like other cable news networks, is it's a corporation, and they're all about maximizing their bottom line. And so with the Mueller findings in particular, and I say this as someone who thinks what the president did and what the campaign did is very troubling, thinks we need to have election security, et cetera. But MSNBC went so far out on a limb in conspiracy theories that it really ended up being damaging. So when we learned what there was to learn about what the president did in fact do and the obstruction of justice and all of that, it was such a letdown compared to this idea built up day after day, show after show, that there was going to be some huge reveal and he had talked directly to Vladimir Putin or something crazy, right? I mean, they actually had, I named this specific example, Jonathan Chait of New York Magazine, who had written a cover story saying, what if Trump was a Russian asset going back to the 1980s? I mean, this was insane. It was pure conjecture. It's not journalism, right? And yet MSNBC was happy to have him on and sort of lay out this conspiracy theory saying, well, it may not be true, but what if it is? I think by focusing on that, and I say this as a Democrat, I think by focusing on that instead of, you know, some of the corruption in this administration that's real, some, you know, more of what they've done to immigrants, their policy that's hurt the working class, they fixated on something that really is of very little import to most Americans, and in doing so really damaged the left. Look, this is my team in a sense, right? And I was there, and so when I criticize them, it lands in a certain way. That does not let, and my conservative friends were very excited to see me criticizing MSNBC, right? Fox News has been the worst in terms of they're basically a mouthpiece for the administration. It's hard to tell where the line ends between the Trump administration and Fox News. The conspiracy theorizing, they went down the path of the Seth Rich stuff, all of that, totally abhorrent at Fox. But I just wanted to point out that MSNBC needs to be seen as having really done damage here, not serving the public interest, certainly not serving Democratic interests, and got way out and over their skis on the Mueller stuff.
You're saying Fox News pretty much doing, to a degree, or if not even to a degree, the same thing? Because Elizabeth Warren has been very tough on Fox News, calling them a hate-for-profit group or organization and all of that.
Well, and I agree with that. I actually think, I disagree with her. I think she should go on Fox News. I think she should face it head on the way that Bernie Sanders has as an example. But one of the distinctions is MSNBC is purely a corporation looking for profit. Fox actually was started as an ideological play. So it's both a profit-generating enterprise where the bottom line matters. It is also an ideological tool. So they really are trying to weaponize propaganda and advance Republican interests.
We're getting into a real murky situation where now we have Don Lemon hosts, or you're moderating, not moderating a debate, but being a panelist.
He was, yeah.
In essence, he was moderating, yeah. And also Rachel Maddow, I mean, was there with the NBC.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine if Sean Hannity on a Fox News debate was there. So I just wonder what this murkiness really means. I mean, this is, it leaves the viewer kind of scratching their head as to what's up, what's down here.
It does. And, you know, I want to be careful about playing into the president's rhetoric about fake news. That being said, I think people need to be really clear-eyed about the fact that these organizations are not about the public interest. In cable news, you know, that's where I've lived my career, so let me speak most directly to that. In particular, is about ratings. It's infotainment, right? It's whatever titillates a viewer. Trump has benefited from that more than anyone.
The once solidly red state of Texas is turning purple. What that means for the Lone Star State and the rest of the country next.
Give me that. Bye. Sure, life is busy, but I found a way to make a huge difference in people's lives. I guess you could say I'm changing the world right here from home. I bring medical supplies and doctors to people in need, and dig wells so that villagers can have clean and safe water to drink. I make it possible to preach the gospel in over 100 countries, including right here in America. And when disaster strikes, I'm there, providing food, thank you, and emergency supplies to give people hope again. Every day, CBN and I are making the world a better place. Here you go. My life is hectic, so I joined CBN through Pledge Express. My bank does all the work, and I know that my gift is being used where it's needed most. So become a CBN partner and join Pledge Express, because you can do a world of good right from where you are. Hi, good morning. Are you ready to get started?
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Get Protect Your Sleep and live your best life with innovative information from 5 leading sleep experts.
If you're not a great sleeper, you can do things to make yourself a great sleeper. If you're already a pretty good sleeper, you can enhance your sleep and be even better.
Discover a sleep-enhancing bedtime routine, how to put insomnia to rest, learn how to relieve pain that disturbs sleep, and much more in Protect Your Sleep.
Everything you do better with a good night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Don't miss out on this brand new series.
Well, welcome back. Republicans have an uphill battle when it comes to winning back control of the House of Representatives in 2020, in part because a number of current congressional Republicans will not be seeking re-election. In just the last 2 weeks, 6 GOP House members have said they are leaving office. Currently, a total of 11 congressional Republicans have decided against running for their seats again, 4 of those coming from districts in Texas.
Well, politically, Texas has been a solid red state for decades now. It may be turning purple, though, with a surge in enthusiasm among Democrats and a changing demographic.
Senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon traveled to the Lone Star State to find out what's going on.
Here in Texas, Democrats are energized. They feel the wind at their backs And that means for the first time in a very long time, Republicans across the state are playing defense. Did you ever think that you would run for office?
That's a, you know, I had jokes with my teachers in elementary. I guess I've always been the diplomat.
On paper, Austin Talley is about as solid a Republican candidate the party could ask for. Veteran, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and native Texan. But in this Austin suburb, his race for the State House is expected to be one of the toughest in Texas.
It's going to be a lot of work. It's supposed to be the third hardest race in the state of Texas for 2020.
We caught up with Talley in the city of Kyle, a place where Republicans have been forced to eat some old-fashioned humble pie. He's running to unseat first-term Democrat Aaron Zwiner, who beat a Republican in 2018. The district is a microcosm of what's happening across the state. How is your community changing? What does it look like?
We get about 110 that moved into this, what is called the Golden Corridor. 110 that move here a day. It's rapidly growing.
Texas is the fastest growing state in the nation. Randon Steinhauser's consulting company is advising Talley's campaign.
Right here on our street, there's 20 houses. My husband is the only native Texan on our street. We have folks from South Korea, Mexico, India, not just the traditional places like Chicago, New York, California, that you hear the rhetoric of all of these folks moving to Texas. They're moving to Texas from all over the world.
And as neighborhoods and communities transform, so do the state's politics. Cities are becoming more blue and spilling into the suburbs, creating new challenges for the GOP.
There is a sense of urgency, and it's excitement as well. And I think it's something that we're realizing in some ways we've taken things for granted.
Stacey Hawk is in charge of raising big bucks for Republican candidates across the state in 2020.
Thousands of people are moving here all the time, and largely from states that have big government policies, high tax, high regulation environments.
And here in Texas, we value freedom. We value the entrepreneurial spirit. We value individualism. And we have a rugged determination to make sure that we protect those freedoms.
For Texas Republicans, it's a conundrum. The same policies that make Texas attractive economically are biting Republicans politically. Analysts have watched the demographics change for years, but last year's surge in enthusiasm among Democrats served as a wake-up call. Beto O'Rourke made national headlines as he came closer to winning a statewide race than any Democrat in a generation, nearly unseating Republican Senator Ted Cruz. The excitement O'Rourke generated helped Democrats pick up 2 congressional seats, 2 state Senate seats, and a dozen seats in the State House. And next year, Democrats have 17 more state house seats in their sights. Tell me what it's like to be a Democrat in Texas these days.
Well, actually, a lot more encouraging than I would tell you last year before we had the last elections.
Democrat Donna Howard has served in the Texas State House for more than a decade. And even though her party is still in the minority, its gains in 2018 transformed the agenda Republicans pursued during the legislative session. With suburban women voters in mind, Republicans held back on pushing certain pro-life legislation and other social issues controversial with that voting bloc. Democrats like Howard welcomed the difference.
We're focused on kitchen table issues, things that make a real difference in the day-to-day lives of Texans, rather than being caught up in sucking up all the oxygen with divisive social issues. We saw even our leadership that was so focused last time on bathroom legislation back off of that totally.
And that's not all. While it's typically tough for Democrats to recruit candidates who don't want to run just to lose, Howard says now great candidates are stepping up because they believe they can win.
So I do think that there is a good possibility that we could become the majority in the next elective cycle.
It's a reality forcing Republicans to rethink their strategy. As Hawk works to raise money, the party is targeting Hispanic, women, and millennial voters to make the case GOP policies benefit them. And every Republican I spoke to pointed out the party must do a better job educating voters about the progress they've made.
For us, we just believe that we have to tell that story and make sure that folks understand that it's Republican policies that have made Texas so free and have made it so competitive.
We're richer for having the conversation and the dialogue, and I think we have a huge case to make.
Candidates like Talley are preparing for battle.
How much work are you going to have to do between now and election time? What does that look like for you?
It's a lot of work. It's probably 450 houses a week, knocking on doors, getting people to meet me and understand who I am.
And there's a wild card. No matter how hard Democrats and Republicans work, much will be determined by the state of the presidential race in 2020. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Austin, Texas.
A new poll shows the biggest winners and losers in last week's Democratic debate. Who took the top spot? We'll tell you right after the break.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Well, Jenna, technically there was no winner in the Democratic national debate during these primaries being held, but that isn't stopping some Americans from picking one.
Yeah, and according to a new Political Morning Consult poll, Elizabeth Warren took first place in last week's debate. 30% of Democratic voters picked Senator Warren as the big winner in the second debate. 18% thought Senator Bernie Sanders won, and Joe Biden came in at number 3. 14% considered him the winner of the two-night event.
And we have many, many more debates to go.
Technically, yeah.
Technically.
Yeah.
Well, that is it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.